The ego goes fighting and kicking throughout this whole process. The ego resists every stage of development and meditation. And another way to say it is maybe just that the mind contracts every time that we reach that just before a stage matures. The final purification of that stage is the ego just kind of coming to terms with it, and it's like accepting that, and then it almost automatically unfolds into the next stage of development. And that's the sense of self kind of relinquishing control and letting the process happen. Okay. All right. Welcome everybody to our community call on meditation and the dark night of the soul. These are the dukkha stages of insight meditation. And insight meditation, of course, is mindfulness meditation, traditionally called Vipassana meditation. And whether you are practicing Vipassana meditation or not, this workshop is completely relevant um, in terms of what these stages do for us in terms of life lessons. You know, the things that we learn in meditation, letting go of thoughts or whatever, or diving into the deep end of the pool of the meditative experiences. The things that we learn in the meditation, those gradual transformations that we go through, are life lessons, all of them. Sometimes we get it and we walk away from the cushion and it doesn't quite apply to our life yet. Other times we get it and it's like, oh my God, it completely applies to our life just from that moment forward. But generally speaking, it we get it in the meditation and we slowly, gradually start to integrate that knowledge or understanding into our life until the point where it's kind of internalized. At that point, it's kind of a wisdom, what you would call wisdom. And the dark night of the soul is it refers to very specific stages that we go through in this transformational process. And like I said before, these stages are clear cut in the Vipassana tradition. I shouldn't say the Vipassana tradition. These stages are clear cut in the Vipassana traditions that primarily work with Abhidhamma or Buddhist psychology, and more specifically progressive insight, developmental stages that you pass through. There are many Vipassana traditions. I shouldn't say many. There are a handful of Vipassana traditions that use these. There are a handful of Vipassana traditions that don't use these, but it's all good Vipassana. It's all mindfulness that activates the transformational process, leads us forward developmentally, evolutionarily, and looking back, you can say, oh yeah, there was some development that happened there, over a period of time. And regardless of whether you're working with this theory or not, this is kind of happening in the meditation practice, regardless if you're doing Vipassana or another type of meditation, or even another tradition, theistic traditions. This happens. It's all part of the developmental process. Why? Because my consciousness and your consciousness and the Buddhist consciousness and everybody on this call's consciousness, everybody that's not on this consciousness, is kind of the same consciousness. We are unique individuals. How we inhabit that consciousness is unique. There's only been one Miles in this whole kind of whatever 14 billion years of evolution of our universe. In that sense, I'm unique, you're unique, we're all unique in how we move through consciousness, but the consciousness is the same. And it turns out there's a blueprint to that consciousness. My students know that. I say this all the time. You've heard me say it many times. And that your blueprint and my blueprint is the same blueprint, that the way it unfolds happens the same for everybody. We all relate to it differently. We all understand it differently. We all go through it differently, but it happens the same for everybody. Or doesn't, as the case may be. And along that transformational journey that meditation and other awareness-based transformational practices, I should say mindfulness meditation, and other awareness-based transformational practices, the journey has ups and downs, and some of those downs are like belly of the whale downs, like really deep dissolution of the self, and it's experienced as a dark night of the soul. So I'm gonna use my slides a little bit here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but they're a good reference point to help us kind of move through this. Okay, so this phrase, meditation of the dark night of the soul, comes from a man named Saint John of the Cross. Saint John of the Cross, I won't go too much into his story, and I'm not an expert on his story, but he went into deep spiritual practice, and he went so deep that at one point in his spiritual journey, he passed through what he called the dark night of the soul, and it was a place where he found that everything that he ever relied on in life was unreliable. All of his beliefs, all of his possessions, all of his relationships, all of his ideology, all of his, even his religion, even his what do you say, paraphernalia, the cross, the clothes, the books, everything that brought him security, even God, that one thing that when everything else falls away, you can hold on to that. As he entered into the dark night of the soul, even that slipped away. And that's why it was a dark night of the soul. Going in, you literally feel completely alone. And even you, the very thing that you would, the sense of self, the ego, whatever you want to call it, that you would rest on for security starts to fall apart. Going into that, that feels like a dark night of the soul. That is the belly of the whale. That is exactly the transformational process. It's a necessary stage or station in the transformational process to take you through that, to where when you come out, you can actually make statements like, if one wishes to be sure of the road that they walk on, they must close their eyes and walk in the dark. And St. John of the Cross wrote this poem called The Dark Night of the Soul. I'm not even going to go into it because I want to start to kind of talk a little bit more about the Buddhist path. But it's a beautiful description of that whole process he went through, and coming out of it, how he was transformed, and coming out of it, how he realized that the only thing, that fire that was in his heart, that faith that kept him moving forward, that was the holiness. That was in a theistic language. That was God for him. And that was the one thing that transformed him through the dark night of the soul. And he realized that there was no way to come in to full communion with God without passing through that stage. And it's the same thing in mindfulness meditation, that we all pass through that stage more or less. It can be stronger or weaker is maybe not the right word, but it can be a stronger impact or a lesser impact. But if you are practicing mindfulness-based meditation, you will pass through that. Mindfulness meditation takes you through a dissolution of the self. Gradually, incrementally, little by little by little, it takes you through a dissolution of the self. And hopefully this happens hopefully it happens gradually, not too strong, not too quick. Hopefully it happens in a context that's held with some type of teaching and understanding of the path. Hopefully it happens when you're surrounded by people, or certainly a spiritual guide or a spiritual friend who has been through this territory that can actually kind of do a little hand holding for you as you go through this. But the dissolution of the self is the process that we all must go through on the way to some type of spiritual liberation, more or less. That's important to understand in context to the dissociation of self. The dissociation of self is more of ego deconstruction. or ego falling apart, or in some cases, ego being shattered, or ego being split. And it's important to understand today, we're not really talking about dissociation itself. I mean, I love to talk about it, and I certainly bring that into any type of understanding of meditation, but I'm not a therapist. It's not my expertise, and I'm not qualified to guide people through that. But it's important to talk about it, that we need to understand that what we're talking about today is going to be the dissolution of the self, and that the dissociation of the self needs to be respected. In fact, there's a famous meditation teacher and psychologist named Jack Engler. He says that you must be somebody before you can be nobody. In other words, you need to have a more or less stable ego development before doing deep into the pool insight meditation. Because these dark ends of the state, these dark night of the soul stages can be extremely destabilizing. And if there's also some, let's say, psychological trauma that hasn't been worked with, or old issues that haven't necessarily been healed yet, then it can have a strong impact. So the point is, we just need to understand that what we're talking about is what happens in normal meditation development, but it doesn't happen in a vacuum. That we all have our own ego development that we go through. A gradual, healthy, incremental, developmental meditation practice, generally speaking, also contributes to a gradual, healthy ego development. Even though the ego is what's being dissolved, it also kind of integrates that way. But we need to do both. We need to do both, among other things. We need to pay attention to healing any issues that we might need to be healed with. And then in meditation, we're transcending the self. I think everybody has an understanding of at some point in your life, one way, large or small, of this notion of what a dark night of the soul is. And sometimes we think, wow, that was such a big one. And then a few years later, we go through something and it's like, oh my God, how do we continue to expand ourselves to tolerate these things? But yeah, so let's look at it from a meditation point of view. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and talk about how the dark night of the soul appears through meditation, for two reasons. One is so we know what's going on in our meditation practice. And number two, meditation practice is the basic practice, the fundamental practice. So the life lesson that we get through the meditative path, not only does it apply to this situation and that situation and that situation, it applies to everything. Everything. Okay, great. All right. So Vipassana Jnana. Now, this is the map of the developmental journey in Vipassana. Again, not everybody here is probably practicing Vipassana meditation, which is completely fine. Not every school uses this map. It doesn't matter. It's good to hold this map really lightly. I practiced with this map. I come out of a tradition that used this map, and I used it. I was taught using this map for years before I even understood that they were using a map. And then later I did all the training with this map. So I kind of, it doesn't matter really for your meditation practice whether you know anything about this map or not. At the same time, it can be helpful to understand. So on the left side, you see the black line that looks like a roller coaster. It starts at the bottom on the left side, then it moves up. It's kind of a peak. Then it goes down. That's the dark night. Then it's a long climb back up. And then there's a plateau. That plateau is equanimity, the insight knowledge of equanimity towards all formations. And that's the point where the mind can make the leap to the other shore and have the experience of Nibbana. Here's a close-up. So over here, this little red dot on the left is kind of where everybody starts in your meditation practice. And that's starting with the stage of access concentration. You learn to develop a certain amount of concentration. It's not a tremendous amount, but the mind does have to be stable. Take some time to do it, but every beginner goes through it. And then the mind can stay with experience from moment to moment to moment. over the course of your practice, as that concentration develops, as your mindfulness develops, as your energetic effort develops, you will traverse the path to Bhavana Nirodha, which is basically the experience of cessation and the experience of Nibbana. That's kind of how it happens. Oh, well, it's so clean and easy. But this path can be divided into three parts. There's the basic stages. And you'll notice these basic stages, kind of the early part of this path. But I have to tell you that 60 to 70, sometimes 80% of the people that I work with, these are the stages that they're working with. And it's not because they're not advanced. It's just these stages can be like a washing machine going around and around and around. There's a lot of hindrances in these stages. There's a lot of mental wandering. There's a lot of aches and pains in the body. It's kind of hard it takes some time before you develop the necessary amount of energetic effort, mindfulness, and concentration to move through these stages. But once you move through these stages, you'll enter what's called the intermediate stages. And then the intermediate stages starts with the peak experiences. You see that first hump or that first hill on the roller coaster. Those are the peak experience stages. And after those peak experiences stages, you basically go into a series of stages of dissolution that leads you into the dark night of the soul. Intermediate stages. This is where the sense of self, or I'll just use the word ego, goes through dissolution. It kind of gets ground down is maybe a bit of an aggressive word. It's a bit of a hard word to use, but it gets thinned out enough to where you can enter the deeper stages or the higher stages, which is the advanced stages of reobservation, and eventually into the stage of equanimity. So that's basically the division of the stages. I'm not going to go too deep into these today, but the intermediate stages are these what is there, 5, 6 stages there? Yeah, 6 stages. It begins, as I said, with the insight knowledge of arising and passing away. This is the classic peak experiences. And it could be many things. Well, first, the concentration is super powered at this point. Your mindfulness is super sharp, super quick. The body is extremely light, and the practice is effortless. All those aches and pains in the body are gone. All those tiring sits are gone. You're just, in a way, flying on a magic carpet ride of meditation, and a lot of far out stuff happens. Some people report a lot of lights flashing. Some people have thrills and chills and energy moving through the body. Some people have this release of kundalini at these stages. This is the peak, yeah, not the valley yet, the peak. People remember past lives at this stage, or things that from childhood. And anyways, it's pretty far out. It's pretty amazing, and it's pretty exciting, and it's a trap. It's so wonderful that the mind can easily become attached to it. In fact, that's one of the impurities of insight. Yeah, okay. So one of the impurities of insight is that these peak experiences can become an attachment. If and when you work through that attachment, simply by doing the same practice that took you into those stages, it'll take you through, you'll pass through the peak experiences, and then you'll enter into dissolution, which is number 5. Oop, there it is. Oop, okay, so 5, the insight knowledge of dissolution, where interesting things happen at dissolution, where you start to experience pretty refined vibrations in the body. Thoughts that arise pretty quickly dissolve away. Sometimes mental experiences like thoughts or images will suddenly pop away like a balloon. It's like there was an image that just arose in the mind. Not you were thinking, an image arose, and boop, mindfulness goes to it. And the moment mindfulness touches it, it's just gone. And let's say that some random thinking comes up, you become mindful of the thinking, and it immediately dissolves away. The different way things can dissolve is, as I said, a random disappearance. A sudden disappearance. It could be a dissolution, like a sugar cube kind of dissolving. Some people experience it like a sand castle, like parts of the body might feel like, sand falling down from a sand castle. This is number 5 here, dissolution. It's called Banga Jnana. Other way, people might experience it like a movie scene that fades away or misty, fading into the mist. You can have visual experiences, like sometimes you'll be looking at, you just be walking, meditation or whatever, and the lines in the wall or a tree might suddenly look like a guitar string that'll vibrate like that. Sounds can start to warp. You hear jing 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 sounds and a lot of interesting things happen in dissolution. And it's pretty cool at the beginning. It's really, really interesting. But as the dissolution matures, and as the mind, whatever you're putting the mind on, things just start to dissolve away, the dissolution starts to get closer and closer and closer to the core of the self. Until sometimes, and the mind, this all happens automatically. This all happens naturally. The mind will take an object and boom, the object just disappears. And those objects might get closer and closer and closer to the sense of self. A notion might arise, you just reflect on that notion, it's gone. The sense of self might arise, you reflect on that sense of self, that this beautiful technique or this beautiful method of mindfulness where certainly in the early stages, we're having a thought or an identification, and we work to differentiate from that thought and observe it and know its qualities and characteristics. All that starts to happen very automatically. You might have a wandering mind for a little while, but the moment you remember to be mindful of it, and it immediately dissolves. Intentions arise, the intention to scratch your nose or the intention to reach for a door. And you'll note the intention, and zoop, the intention's gone. And because the intention's gone, there's no reaching to scratch the nose. There's still the itch. And you say, oh, I want to scratch the nose. I mean, you can still scratch your nose, but interesting things like that start to happen. And at some point, it gets quicker and quicker and quicker and closer and closer and closer to the core of the sense of self. And then the core of the sense of self starts to dissolve. And what was cool, kind of cool and interesting, it's like, wow, this is great meditation, before suddenly becomes unsettling. And this is the beginning of really entering into the dark night of the soul. That's the stage number 6 that's already up there. It's called the insight knowledge of fear. So we go from peak experience, passing through that by letting go of the attachment to those wonderful experiences, beginning into dissolution, a lot of really interesting things. Wow, it's all dissolving. And then that dissolution starts to hit the core of the sense of self, and there is an immediately recoiling of the self. There's like, oh my God, what's going on? It was so cool before. Now it's not so cool. It's kind of unsettling. And this is called the insight knowledge of fear. And there's a basic recoiling or contracting away from the dissolution of not experience, but the dissolution of sense of self. Does that make sense? Maybe you've experienced this before. Maybe you haven't, but it's kind of logical. And the reason there's a sense, I mean, just imagine this. Imagine you're sitting on your chair or whatever, and unbeknownst to you, there's a trap door beneath you. Yeah. The trap doors. Imagine it suddenly opening right now. You would, if you felt yourself following, you would immediately reach out to grab something. There would be a recoiling away from that falling down. There would be a resistance, an immediately contracting and grabbing. That's it's a bit of a metaphor, but not really, the insight knowledge of fear. Many of us come to meditation. I wouldn't say everybody, but people do come to meditation to somehow feel better. Meditation is good. The benefits are wonderful. The stress gets reduced. I relax. My mind is empty. I start to be free. I kind of process all these things that need to be processed. Yeah, that's all true. But meditation is not always the case. That's not always the case. That's certainly the case in the deep end of the pool, the higher stages. But the way to get the higher stages is through these dark night stages. And actually, it's incredibly stressful. That's why you need to be somebody before you become nobody. That's why you have to have a certain amount of tolerance and balance, and certainly you can do, if you don't, you can do this meditation practice. You can still do this meditation practice, but it's good to have not just a meditation guide, but maybe a therapist as well. And certainly a meditation guide, because I have spoken to many people, not this doesn't happen to everybody, but I've spoken to many yogis, many meditators where they had no idea what was going on and they suddenly found themselves in the stage. And like if they were on retreat, they packed up their cushion and they went home. It's too much. I kind of knew what was coming, and when this first happened to me, I left the meditation hall. First, I had to go to the toilet. Maybe too much information, but I everything was out. I was losing everything, and then I basically went to my room for like a day, and I didn't meditate. And then my teacher called me and he said, "Hey, what's going on?" I explained. He says, "Get back to the cushion." You know, he basically told me, he contextualized it for me and helped me work with it. Um, but yeah, this recoiling can happen, but it makes sense, because when the sense of self at the core, that very thing, the dark night of the soul, St. John of the Cross, the very thing that we rely on for security is actually not secure. The universal characteristic of non-self is universal. It's not just me over here, the core of self, and then everything out there is non-self. It's all subject to change. No, no, me too. And when we start to confront that, we start to experience that directly in meditation as a step on the process to liberation. Going in, it really feels like a dark night of the soul. Coming out, it's like, oh my God, of course. Of course, I'll go back to St. John of the Cross. Coming out, if one wishes to be sure of the road they walk on, they must close their eyes and walk in the dark. Oh my God. You can't say that before. I mean, you can say it, but excuse me, it's bullshit. After, when you experience, it's like, oh, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. Once we practice enough, as this process matures, by the way, if you're ever, for those who do retreats, and if you enter these stages on retreats, it might just take a few days to go through these. There's 3 deep stages, which I'm talking about right now. It might take a few days to go through those. Happens in daily life. It may take a little bit longer, but it won't be as intense because retreats are special situations. But the recoiling and contracting doesn't work. If I was falling in a pit right now and I recoiled and contracted, I might actually catch something that could save me. Or imagine quicksand. I'll grab a vine and I get out of the quicksand. But in the meditation, there's anything you grab onto is dissolving. Any ground you try to stand on is dissolving. Any place you try to put your faith dissolves. I'm gonna suddenly say some prayers to God, they dissolve. Whatever. It's all dissolving. And as this stage matures, this insight knowledge of fear, as it matures, the mind starts to get that the recoiling and the contracting doesn't work. It doesn't work. It is futile. And it's not an idea, it's experience. And that leads you into the next stage of the dark night of the soul, the next insight knowledge stage of the dark night of the soul, which is called the insight knowledge of misery. Oh my God. Who starts a spiritual path to go through a stage called the insight knowledge of misery? Well, unfortunately, that is for better or worse, that is the name of the stage. And the contracting and recoiling kind of stops. You kind of give up because you realize it's futile. And what happens instead is that you're kind of left wallowing in, I mean, there might be a little bit of self-pity there, but even the self-pity is dissolving. Like if it was, if let's imagine I lost a job or something. It's like, oh, I'd feel so bad for myself, and I might need a week to just kind of, wallow in self-pity. In the meditation practice, and you can't, I mean, the wallowing's there, but there's nothing to wallow in because it's all dissolving. And that's why it's called the insight stage of misery, because you really, really, really start to understand there is no place to rest your security on. There's nothing secure. There's that. You're not at the stage where that lack of security is liberation. You're prior to that where the sense of self is still trying to get it. The Tibetan teacher who was in America, Chogyam Trungpa, he has this beautiful saying that there's good news and the bad news. The bad news is that we're falling. The bad news is that you are falling. You are in a free fall. That's the bad news. Wake up and smell the coffee. This is the stage where it's like you can't deny it anymore. You are in a free fall. We are all in a free fall. That's the bad news. But the good news is there's no bottom. The good news is there's no bottom. In the first stage of fear, we're recoiling from hitting the bottom. In this one, we're just kind of we're just in misery because we realize that no, this is just falling. There's no way to stop this process. The mind has become quick enough. The insight has become sharp enough. The insight into the dissolution of all phenomena. So basically, wherever you're putting your mind starts to dissolve. As that matures, it takes you one step deeper into the dark night of the soul. We're not out of the tunnel yet. We're still going a bit deeper into the belly of the well, and this is the deepest of the deep. This is called the insight knowledge of dispassion. Dispassion. Sometimes it's translated as the insight knowledge of disgust, but I think dispassion is a better stage. In the insight knowledge of dispassion, the mind finally gets it. The mind gets it, and it's like, yeah, there's no security anywhere, but it misinterprets it. There's no security anywhere, therefore, why should I bother? Now, for those who have some understanding of, let's say, psychological understanding, or certainly therapists, I know there's several therapists on this call, or psychologists or psychiatrists. When a person comes to that stage unintentionally, not through intentional spiritual practice, not through intentional mindfulness practice. When somebody comes to that stage that it's like, there's no point, why should I bother? That's actually psychologically critical conditions, a little bit dangerous. And maybe even on this call, some of us have experienced that, and that needs to be so respected. And certainly, professional help is the way, is necessary. The difference between that and meditation is that this is all self-caused, that we intentionally took on this practice. We intentionally continue to do the mindfulness practice. So as we're going through this incredible, difficult dissolution that leads into a dark room, we're developing spiritual powers. In other words, we're developing energetic effort. So it's brought us there. We're developing mindfulness. It's what brought us here. We're developing concentration. It's what brought us here. We're developing faith. That's what's brought us into this stage. And the very thing that brought us here are going to carry us through. And on the other end, we're developing wisdom, that we're actually getting through these stages. And the life lesson, the deep learning, is as deep as you can go. That's why meditation is the fundamental practice. I wouldn't say it's the only fundamental practice, but it is definitely the fundamental practice. In the insight knowledge of dispassion, there's this profound sense of why bother. It's like, no, everywhere I look, existence is oppressed by anicca, dukkha, and anatta. That every moment, every formation, every phenomena, physical or non-physical, is oppressed by these three universal characteristics. And I'm using the word oppressed intentionally, because this is the fundamental oppression. We think, oh, oppression, oppression. Yeah, sure, okay. But this is the fundamental oppression, is that everything is subject to change. First universal characteristic. Because everything is subject to change, it is bound by the second universal characteristic of unsatisfactoriness, dukkha. There's no ultimate satisfaction to be found anywhere in universal phenomena, because it's unsatisfying. And if we able to stay with that, and you start to get it at this stage, you'll start to realize that it is all empty. There is no self there. And at this stage, the previous stages, the anatta, the non-self, is kind of nice and liberating and effortless and pleasant. At this stage, it's like, oh my God, there really is no self. Even the part of you that goes, oh my God, there really is, suddenly is gone. It's all gone. It's all gone. It's all dissolving before our eyes. And it's tough to get through that. Again, remember, on retreat, this could be a 2-3 day process. Daily life, it could be, something we go through. But having a little bit of understanding is super important, because you have to remember, just like in the peak stages, the thing that took you into the practice, basically mindfulness that took you into the peak experiences, take you through it. The practice of mindfulness that take you into the dissolution stages will take you through it. Winston Churchill, the only way out is through. No, what did he say? When you're going through hell, keep going, keep going. The practice will take you through. And that's the encouragement. Hopefully you'll have, if you go through this, you'll have support. But the faith, and this is where St. John's dark night of the soul, the one thing that he kept faith in, which was God, in the darkest of the dark night, even that was gone. Oh my God. Even that will be gone at this stage. But should you manage to just keep being mindful, and by the way, in this dispassionate stage, the insight knowledge of dispassion, you could be apathetic, which is a little bit kind of, it can be a bit of a fixation if you're not careful. But it's like, the things that you usually take pleasure in, whatever, I got a new shirt, so shirt, or your hair, or food, or just things that you enjoy in life. Suddenly you look at them and you're like, what bother? Anybody ever had that experience before? I mean, there's having that experience in meditation. There's also having these experiences in our worldly life. They may or may not be the same thing, but the experience is the same. You're like, oh, why bother? But if you do bother, and if you just one step at a time, one mindful moment after the next mindful moment, it will take you through into the next stage of insight knowledge, which is the stage called the insight knowledge of the wish for liberation. This is the beginning of coming out of the belly of the whale. If you're a boat, a sailboat, suddenly there's wind in the sails again, and faith is renewed. And the insight that comes up at this stage, the insight that arises at this stage, is that, yeah, it's all subject to anicca, dukkha, and anatta. It's all subject to change. It's all subject to unsatisfactoriness, and it's all fundamentally empty. Therefore, this path of liberation, I want to go through it. I really want to kind of go through this. It arises naturally. It's not that a teacher says that and then you think it. It arises naturally as part of this process. You come out of it with a deeper acceptance of the fundamental nature of reality, and you want to be liberated. So you get a renewed sense of urgency. You have a long climb up through, I say a long climb, it's a bit, the next few stages are kind of, they're sometimes called slippery slopes, but once you get up to them, you'll enter into the stage of equanimity. These are the intermediate stages. This is what I've been talking about, this green area. Number one is the insight knowledge of arising and passing away. That is the beautiful peak experiences. So important, because your faith, you are on fire for meditation after this stage. And it's a good thing, because you're about to go through hell. The fifth stage is the insight knowledge of dissolution. Starts off as very nice and interesting. Then it starts to become a little bit unsettling, brings you into the insight knowledge of fear, takes you into the insight knowledge of misery, into the insight knowledge of dispassion, and then you have the insight knowledge of wish for liberation. And as you come out of that, you have a deeper acceptance of experience. So I was saying that this is specific to meditation, but it has a deep life learning. It applies to everything in life, and it applies to everything in death. And what do I mean by that? I mean, some of you are probably familiar, or if not all of you are familiar with the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grieving. I'm sure many of us here, if not everybody here, has lost someone near and dear to them. And that's not fun. It's kind of can be horrible even. But it's a process that we may or may not go through. And the 5 stages of grieving begin with denial. And then it goes to anger, then bargaining, then depression, then acceptance. So this, oddly enough, this maps on perfectly to the dark night of the soul stages. That the denial happens at the beginning of dissolution and fear. That recoiling and contraction away from the experience can be the experience. It's like a denial of what's actually happening. And that can even manifest as anger as you start to hit the deeper bottom. Like in this map here, bargaining's at the bottom. I don't know why I would think that depression would actually be at the bottom. Sorry, I gotta, oh, there we go. Somebody wants to come in, so I gotta go back to here. But you go through this process, and the depression, if there's any place to get stuck in the grieving process, it can be depression. In a person's meditation, if there's any place to get stuck, if they're not careful, it can be the dark night of the soul stages, the so-called dukkha stages, the dukkha jnanas. But if you just keeping mindful of what experience that's arising, moment to moment mindfulness, it will take you through, and you'll come to that stage of a wish for liberation, which is the stage of acceptance in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's grief cycle. Coming through that stage, you don't deny that death happens. You don't deny that bad things happen. You don't deny that loss happens. You don't deny that this stuff is unfair. In fact, you begin to embrace that this is just the randomness of life. And it is all of every single one of us. That's our human, in a way, dilemma or plight. But wisdom in this worldly sense is actually having, if you go through that enough, you come out of it with a deeper acceptance of the beauty of life, the heaven and the hell of life, the peaks and the valleys of life. Going through this in meditation prepares you, because ultimately, every moment of letting go in meditation is like a mini death, is like a small death, and we go through this kind of process, and it happens in small ways and it happens in big ways. And the dark night of the soul stages, these dukkha jnanas, going through that the first time can be really, really challenging. But then as we go through those stages again and again, because, like I always say, we sit down to meditate, we start where we start, and we get back up to our leading edge. We stop meditating. Next day we start where we're at, and we get back up to our leading edge. And at the leading edge, we're incrementally developing. Stop meditating, we fall back down. Start meditating sooner, within a few minutes, a few moments, a few minutes, a few hours, whatever, we get back up to the leading edge. So that part that we're moving through, we could be going through these dukkha stages quite a bit, on a daily basis, but we're learning from them. And the life lessons that we get there is that recoiling and contracting from experience is normal. That's just what the self does. As we get that more and more, we realize that it's futile, and that there's no, quite literally is futile. And acceptance of that is what takes us through it. It can be pretty apathetic sometimes, but it will lead you through to a greater liberation. These stages are all happening at the same time that we're developing the 7 factors of awakening. So it's not only depressing. When you sit down and meditate, you know that there's good mindfulness, like the wholesome state of mindfulness is there. The wholesome state of energetic effort is there. The wholesome state of investigation, you can investigation into phenomena. The wholesome state of joy is still there, even in these dukkha stages. The wholesome state of tranquility, bliss, and composure is still there. In fact, it's growing, it's cultivating the whole time. The wholesome state of concentration is there. And eventually, or I shouldn't say eventually, but incrementally, the wholesome state of equanimity is being cultivated throughout. So as we're facing these things, we're still developing the awakening factors in our mind. So these are the dukkha stages in our practice. And maybe before I open it up for any questions, because we're right on the hour, I'll repeat this quote from St. John of the Cross. If one wishes to be sure of the road that they walk on, pick a road that you walk on, they must close their eyes and be willing to walk in the dark. I'll be happy to take some questions or comments. Anita, I called on you because you did the, not just you, several people here, but you were in the workshop that we did 3 months that was, and then we never really got to go deep into this. So I'm wondering, how is that for you with the connection to
what we went? It was helpful to expand the sorts of experiences one might have in each of the stages, because I think recognizing them would be really important. I kind of wanted to, since you've given me the opportunity to speak, I'd kind of say that when you asked us in the small group, have we experienced long dark nights of the soul? And I suppose I would say yes, in terms of, for example, loss of identity when I stopped being a doctor. So right. But the difference is it's not intentional. Becoming depressed doesn't have an intention in the way that
right.
meditation does. But on the other hand, what struck me is that if I have experienced those sort of miseries and despair and dispassion, I have also, because I'm not depressed anymore, experienced coming out of.
There you go.
So, but does that sort of, in a way, does that help, the sense that I have a resilience? I know what it's like to go there, but I also know what it's like to come up, even though I didn't do that with intention.
No, it definitely helps for sure. There's no question about it. I mean, again, when I use the word ego, I use it very, very lightly here, because I do believe that ego development is super important for every meditator. Happy, healthy, functional, mature ego development. But just to use this term a little bit loosely here, the ego goes fighting and kicking throughout this whole process. The ego resists every stage of development and meditation. And another way to say it is maybe just that the mind contracts every time that we reach that, just before a stage matures. The final purification of that stage is the ego just kind of coming to terms with it, and then it's like accepting that, and then it almost automatically unfolds into the next stage of development. And that's the sense of self kind of relinquishing control and letting the process happen. And then at that next stage, even though I've matured into the next stage, that tendency of grasping and clinging and wanting to control reality is always there. It just, in the deeper stages, the deeper states of meditation, it's less there. The grasping and clinging is really relaxed, and the sense of self is receded to the background, so you can be in a flow, either a flow of experience or that moment to moment coming and going of experience, the dissolution of experience. So going through that in life, I think will help somebody, let's say having that, I'm going to call it wisdom because it is wisdom, coming out of a challenging period of life, like Kubler-Ross's stages with some acceptance. Let's just call that wisdom, call it what it is. It's wisdom. That wisdom will help a person in meditation. But you still got to go through, what has to be traversed has to be traversed. Vice versa. Let's say you went through all that in meditation, loved ones are still going to pass away. Careers are going to, change. And you still have to come to terms with that in life. Even though I said meditation is the fundamental practice, I think that when the mind gets this in meditation, it's able to apply that to every aspect of our life. But the application of wisdom, there's 3 trainings that we're doing in Buddhism. There's the morality training or the ethical training, which I don't speak much about here. That's not the purpose of this group. It's more the meditation, which is the second training, the mental development, the bhavana. But the third training is the training of wisdom. And that training of wisdom is the insights that arise in our practice. What does it mean when I come to apply that to the world? That's a whole nother practice. It's kind of coming back to the marketplace practice.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions about the practice as well. Like, I didn't talk phenomenologically too much about what happens at these stages. But I'll just say a few things because we have so many experiences in meditation, and often we just think, oh, that was interesting, or it was random, but nothing's random in the meditation practice. What I mean is each stage has certain types of phenomena that's going to happen. For example, dissolution, like if you're experiencing vibrations in the body, constant vibrations in the body, as long as you're focusing, that's dissolution. If you're experiencing like in the insight knowledge of fear, you can quite literally have that feeling you fell in a hole. You might even feel like you're being drained from the inside down. The posture, which was quite good in those previous stages, might suddenly become slumpy and heavy, like a beanbag, kind of like feels like a beanbag. In the misery stage, you can actually start to fall forward. And, if often in meditation, we have this idea that I have to keep my posture straight. So we kind of fight that. But if you stop fighting, because remember, these dukkha jnana stages, just like everything, it's like, oh, I can't be bothered. Look, if you let go, the body will slump down. In the dispassion stage, the body can start to fall back, just phenomenologically. And I should be a bit more precise. If your primary object of meditation is the breath, those things can happen. If you're doing body scans, it'll be a little bit different. If you're doing chitta nupassana or watching the mind, it can be a little bit different.
Yeah, this is possibly possibly such a big question. This is possibly best left. I think we've got an interview coming up in a couple of days, and maybe it's a question for that. But just generally, what you were talking about the kind of things that arise in our meditation, we then have to learn to kind of apply them or recognize them or whatever in daily life. And I have the impression that I experience that kind of in reverse. That is to say, whenever I attend these things or go through the kind of weekly things that I read in as recordings from you, because it's too much for me to get up at this time in the morning too often. Right. I have let's just say that I have a progress or process that I seem to be going through, but I only or nearly only experience it in daily life. And in my practice, I'm actually feeling very, very, I wouldn't say stagnant, because that's had a very negative feel to it, but I don't notice these progressions. I don't notice much as a progression in my practice. Mm-hmm. And this for many, many months now. Yeah. I've learned to accept that, but it seems that, yeah, it seems almost in reverse, if you like. I mean, it's not that I notice phenomena or these kind of, let's call them mental changes during practice, and then they appear in daily life. I kind of recognize them from my daily life, from my daily self, and don't really recognize them in my practice.
Well, okay. I mean, so that's great. I like, well, a couple of things. I mean, often we're experiencing, look, when I do interviews with people, I'm faithful to the tradition I come from. Basically, I just ask leading questions. Of course, the leading questions are specific to where I'm trying to feel where they're at a little bit, and then I'll ask leading questions about that, and then they start to look a little bit closer, and then they'll report more to me. So they obviously experiences are happening to them. They're just not quite clear that they're happening yet. So if I ask, oh, so can you tell me a little bit more about that, or what is this, or what's the quality of that? They'll take a moment, stop, and they'll feel into it, and they'll say a lot more about it. So there's things that, especially, you follow this progressive insight, you kind of know that people are experiencing, or you get an idea that there good possibility that they're having certain experiences based on that stage. So I'll ask a little bit deeper, and then they start to see it, and then they find the words to articulate it. That's when it kind of all comes together. That's why the interviews are really nice and helpful. But what often happens is what you're experiencing in your meditation, whether you're cognizant of it or not, the same phenomena starts to happen in life, just like you've been saying. So it's not uncommon for somebody, if we just stay with these dukkha stages for a moment. And again, they're not beginner stages. But somebody could be going through these, and then in their daily life, they just kind of start to feel either recoiling or contracted or resistant, or they start to feel like wallowing in self-pity or feeling sorry for themselves. It's like, oh, I can't get a break. Or they might start to feel dispassionate or even apathetic. That could have a psychological reason. Like Anita was saying, you change a job, you change your career, and suddenly you get, all that meaning that was infused in that identity is gone. It's like, well, for sure it has that, but it could also have a dharma meaning to it, a dharma reason to it. So they're definitely connected.
Can I just quickly latch onto that? Is there any way of, I mean, obviously you could analyze your life to try to see what the cause is in life, but is there any way that you can tell the difference between whether these symptoms are dharma related or sort of caused by, as I say, by just the vagaries of daily life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Usually in retrospect, we can make that determination or that distinction or the discernment in retrospect. In the moment, it's kind of hard to say. If you're working with somebody, or if you've got friends that have been through certain stages, and you really talk about, like a close meditation friend that can discuss such things, you might be able to determine if it's practice related or not. But when I was on retreat, well, my teachers, whatever you brought into the meditation interview, they'd always say, "Oh, that's practice related." Maybe it's my mommy issues. I don't know. But then if it comes to meditation, it's practice related. I say that as is not necessarily the best response to that. It could be something that needs some therapeutic attention, or it could just be practice related. But what you'll know is as you pass through it, you'll be able to notice it in retrospect. The dark night of the soul means we don't know the next step. We don't know. We don't know the next step. You're stepping into the unknown, profoundly stepping into the unknown. You're closing your eyes and you're walking in the dark. Oh my God. That's tough. That's why it's the dark night of the soul. So thank God, and I know this is Buddhism, but thank God that faith gets developed every step of the way. I mean, faith is what takes us, it's what starts us on this path. It's what gets verified again and again with each deeper experience. We're getting a little bit of a verification, a boost in our faith, and it's what takes us all the way through this stuff. And then at some point, faith gets replaced with wisdom. And then the faith is unshakable. It's not even a question. Thanks, guy. It's good to see you again. Carl. Carl.
Well, I was just going to ask about that faith because the initial St. John of the Cross, everything disappeared, but somehow faith got him out of it. It changed that dark night of the soul into the next stage. And
Yeah,
I'm thinking my practice is mostly about enduring. And that becomes the only thing left is faith. And I don't know where it comes from. How do I manufacture faith? How do I?
Well, you can't. You can't. Manufactured faith is always going to be shaken. Something can come along to shake that sooner or later. Something bigger can come along and just shake your faith. The fact is that, hang on a second, about another 10 minutes, okay? And my daughter's here with me, summer vacation. The faith that I'm talking about, Carl, is something that we take a leap into the unknown to find that we step into that big void to find that our foot lands on something solid. That's not solid, if we stay Buddhist about this. And over time, that gets with every like what I talked about today. These kind of scary stages of the dark night of the soul. I hope I wasn't too gloomy for everybody. But when you start to see that, when that starts to unfold in your practice, like, oh my God, it's true. It's a fact. That, what do you say? Paradoxically, just inspires you so much. It inspires so much. It's like, yeah, and guess what? Then there comes the wish. After you go through all that stuff, then comes the wish for liberation. Then comes more purification. Then comes equanimity. Comes the first path. Then comes liberation. Then comes, and then there's deeper purification. It's all, it's never over, really. A lot of purification, a lot of, practice matures over time, but it's just the faith. It gets boosted along the way. And the three types of faith is the preliminary faith that we just keep, hang in there, baby. Then we get the verified faith, those little kind of every little insight that opens with insight, little ones and big ones. Our faith gets verified. Then comes the last one, which is the culminating faith, that when the Dhamma is seen at a deep enough level, it's unshakable. There's never doubt, ever again, because you know it, because it's yours. It's become fully internalized through your direct experience. Doubt never arises again about the practice, about the path, about the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, or St. John of the Cross. Even though he wasn't a Buddha, I guess he was a Buddha. Even it's not Buddhism. These saints, you don't doubt them anymore because
Well, I have faith in the dark, but I don't have faith in coming out of it.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, you're right on track. You're right on track. That's kind of how it is, Carl.
Another 400 years. Okay.
When you're going through hell, keep going. Thanks, Carl. Okay. St. John of the Cross. Here we go. That thou may have pleasure in everything, seek pleasure in nothing. That thou may knowest everything, seek to know nothing. That thou mayest possess everything, seek to possess nothing. That thou mayest be everything, seek to be nothing. St. John of the Cross. And with that, I hope that this short little community call on the dark night of the soul gives you some benefit, and may it in some way be a light on your journey, especially in those darker parts of the journey, and may that lead you forward forever and always forward on your path of meditation. Thank you, everybody.